Okay, good day everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn and I run the activities at MedComsNetworking.com, which is basically providing information services to the global MedComs industry. What I'm trying to do is encourage people in and around the industry to talk to each other. I'm trying to encourage, develop and champion best practice. One of the things I'm trying to do is shout about the business to people outside of the business who might like to come and join us as writers, account managers and so on. One of the services I run is called FirstMedCommsJob.com. So just get that plug in there for those of you looking to join MedComs. If you've not seen it yet, you'll find articles, videos, audio, careers guides. We run the careers events and so on. So FirstMedCommsJob.com if you're interested in joining MedComs. We've recently published the latest issue of one of the careers guides we have, which is from academic to medical writer. So the careers guide for people who are interested in medical writing. And one of the things we do in the careers guides, all the careers guides, is we include profiles of individuals. And I think it's really good to bring the job to life by hearing from the individuals who are doing the job. And I've taken that idea online, as it were, today. I've asked 4 of the writers from 4 different agencies to come online, talk to us about their journey into MedComs and their current role. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with each of them introduce themselves, just talking for 2 or 3 minutes about their journal, their role, and what they're doing, and then we'll open this up to Q&A and invite questions from the audience. So to get as much insight as we can into the sort of work the medical writers do in MedComs today. So on that note, if everyone's happy, I'm going to ask Linda to kick us off. Linda, can you tell us who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Yep, thanks, Peter. I'm Linda Townsend. I'm a medical writer at Ashfield Healthcare Communications in Macclesfield. I had a strange journey into this role. I did a PhD at Manchester in organic chemistry, and I went straight from there to work for AstraZeneca, and I was there for nearly 20 years. So I spent 4 years in the lab, and then I spent 14 years doing scientific informatics, and that was at Alderley Park in Cheshire. When AstraZeneca decided that they were moving their discovery site down to Cambridge, I had the opportunity to start a new career, and I chose to do that. And I decided I would go for a dream job, so something that sounded really exciting, something close to the science, and something that would fulfil what I wanted from a new career. I didn't really know anything about medical writing. I'd never heard of it until maybe a couple of years before I left AstraZeneca. I happened to meet somebody who was a medical writer, told me a bit about the job that she did, and then I started looking for materials, and luckily Peter was around and provided a lot of information. I read up on it, it sounded fantastic, and so I chose to have a look and see what I could do. So I've been here about 2.5 years now, and I absolutely love it, which is great. Considering I chose it, it might be my own fault if I didn't enjoy it. But it was the sort of thing that really appealed to me, because it was really looking at being close to the science, having to think about patients and clinicians, and really feeling like we can use our skills as communicators to really help patients. And like I say, I'm loving it.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Linda. Joe, I'm going to ask you next to do the same thing. Who are you, where are you, and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Joe Pickering, and I'm a medical writer at Mudskipper. We're based in Bollington, which is near Macclesfield, and we're based in several other locations as well, but I'm in Bollington. So I have a background in developmental biology. So I completed my PhD at the University of Sheffield in developmental biology, where I studied muscle formation using the zebrafish as an embryonic model. It's a great experience. So it was a 4-year project. It was quite technically challenging. So by the end of this project, I was looking for a role kind of outside of academia and outside of the laboratory, to have a bit of a break from the laboratory. So I was also looking for a role which would give me more kind of business and commercial skills. So I took on the role of an account manager for a small biotech company. And this was a company based in Dundee, although I was actually based in England myself, covering territories of the North and the Midlands of England. And really in this role, I would travel to different universities, meet with different researchers and postdoc researchers, and kind of discuss their project requirements and look for ways in which I could sell a product or a service. And it was a good role, and I learned a lot about business in this time and how to interact with clients. But eventually I started to miss the kind of intellectual ownership that you get with something like a PhD, where you generate your own data and analyze your own data and look for the best ways to kind of present that data. So I actually went back into academia as a postdoc researcher this time, and spent 4.5 years as a postdoc researcher, again in developmental biology, this time studying limb formation and how limbs form in the embryo using the chicken embryo as a model. And again, this was a fantastic experience. I love this postdoc, and I acquired a lot of really absolutely useful fundamental skills that are required as a medical writer. So, for example, I'd be writing manuscripts and publishing data, producing data and analyzing data, and the best ways to kind of present this data, whether it be in posters or slide decks or presentations at conferences, for example. So these are all kind of fundamental skills to being a medical writer. And crucially, during this time, I published 4 or 5 manuscripts as well. So this has stood me in good stead for becoming a medical writer. But as time progressed during this role, I think, like a lot of postdoctoral researchers find, I began to have concerns about the kind of security and the long term in this career, relying on grants and funding applications, for example. So I then started looking for roles again in science outside of academia, and then I stumbled across MedComms. I had several friends that had gone down that route already and were medical writers, so I was able to chat with them and find out what the job's about and find out about the varied role. And I also found Peter's guide for new medical writers, the previous edition, and I found that very useful and actually quite inspiring. Some of the stories that people were talking about, how interested and how excited they were. So yeah, I was extremely interested in the role, and I applied to Mudskipper, and here I am a year later, and as I said, it's been a great year so far. And I've been able to work across many different accounts, so I've learned and gained expertise in areas such as dermatology and psoriasis, and respiratory and COPD, oncology and lung cancers, and MSL excellence. I've had a really kind of varied role at Mudskipper. So it's definitely kind of satisfies my intellectual curiosity that I was concerned I'd lose leaving academia, but no, it's fantastic as a medical writer at Mudskipper.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Joe. Tim, can we call on you next to give us your little potted history, as it were?
Thank you, Peter. Hi, I'm Tim van Hartevelt. I followed sort of a similar path as Joe, spending some time in academia. I did always wanted to be a scientist, a healthcare scientist, working on neuroscience, mostly focusing on Parkinson's disease. Followed the usual path, did a master's degree, a research master's, then did a PhD. And at the end of my PhD, I managed to get a really nice postdoc position. So I worked at the University of Oxford for many years. And as Joe was mentioning, you get to the point where, your job security is always a big question mark, really. At the end of every grant you have, 2-3 years, you're wondering what the next project is going to be, whether you're going to have a job or not. So that's obviously a really big aspect. But for me, what also really mattered is that not just security is really nice, but sort of more of an idea of a long-term goal. Where am I going to go with this every 2 years? Am I going to do a different type of project, different topic? And it was really difficult to build on something, not just because of the lack of security, but really to progress and really move up. And so I was wondering, what can I do with my scientific skills and the knowledge I have? Still working in science, but something where I can build a long-term career and really work towards a goal. And started talking to friends who were working in MedComms. And some really interesting conversation, the type of topics they're working on, the type of clients they're working with, how they use whatever they've learned during their PhDs. And obviously they all referred me to Peter's First Jobs in MedComms guides. So that some good reading material there. And so I applied for a job at Oxford PharmaGenesis, and it's been a really interesting year, and there's a lot of new skills I had to learn in the first year. And yes, Joe mentioned, you write your manuscript as a postdoc or as a PhD student, you do your presentations, what I found is that whenever I did that as a postdoc, I wrote them more for myself, and I wanted to get my research out there. And now I'm not writing it for myself. I really have to say, well, who's actually reading it and what do they need to know? So it's a very different approach to the same task. So there's a lot of interesting skills that I've learned in the last year, and it's been really exciting and a really good year for me as well, as I've been here just over a year and just got promoted. So, you know, it's a great time, something that in university I've never dreamt of, getting promoted just because you're doing a good job. So there's a lot of other benefits other than just having a great time and really being able to use skills you've built over years in a very different setting. So here I am, quite happy.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Tim. Simran, go on then, you do the same for yourself.
So hi, I'm Sim. I work for Helios Medical Communications, and I'm based at Oldley Park, so the old AstraZeneca site that Linda mentioned a little bit earlier. I've been a medical writer for 3 years, recently promoted to senior medical writer, and my journey started with, I did medical science at University of Birmingham and realised that I enjoyed the science, and in order to get far in science you needed a PhD really. So I pursued a PhD in brain tumours in children, particularly MRI, and absolutely loved every single aspect of it, my team, my project, and then I was a postdoc for a year, but my situation changed in the fact that I got married and my husband lives up here in Manchester. So I was like, well, I can't be commuting between Birmingham and Manchester, it's just not practical. So I tried to look for alternative jobs where I could keep the science and where my PhD would be useful, because I didn't want to have worked 4 years and not to lose those skills. And I also came across Peter's FirstMedCommsJobs, and I went down to London to kind of understand what medical communications is all about, because that was the first time I'd heard of it. So one of the postdocs in my lab had said, oh, I have a friend who works in MedComms. How about you speak to him and see what it's about? So he pointed me in the direction of the resources that Peter's put together, and initially thought, I don't really know what account manager is. I don't know the difference. I don't know what it is that I want to do. And after hearing a few people talk, I realised that actually medical writer was one of the the roles that I'd be really interested in. So at the time, I didn't know the difference between big medical communications companies and small ones, and I happened to come across Helios, and at the time I'd just been in for about 6 months, and managed to get a job as an associate medical writer with Helios. So that's my journey.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everybody for, someone's got a bit of noise in the background, sorry, just keep yourselves on mute if you're not talking, can you guys? So thank you, and thank you for the mentions of FirstMedCommsJob, and as someone's just commented in the chat box, no one's been paid to mention that, but I think we have got some useful resources there. Just at this point, guys, and I'm talking to the audience now, do come in with some questions and comments, okay, because we'd like to pick up on what you're interested in knowing. But can I just also just run around everybody very quickly? It's great to hear your different backgrounds, and there's 1 or 2 things in there I'd like to pick up on, but just let's paint very, very briefly the picture of the agencies. So Linda, just briefly, Ashfield Healthcare Communications, big, yeah?
Yeah, big agency, but small agencies as well, because we have a lot of small agencies within the larger unit. So it's actually like a big company, but with a small company feel, which I really like, having come from a very large company. So yeah, we have a lot of different agencies based all around the world, mostly in Macclesfield, but also Scotland, down near London. We've got US, we've got Japan, Spain, all sorts of places. Yeah, so it's big company but small company feel, which I like.
Okay, but I'm emphasising big. I'm sort of thinking in terms of MedComms terms. It's a big MedComms group, isn't it? And you're part of a much bigger organisation, which has an effect, even if the individual agencies are operating a little bit independently. Joe, you said Mudskipper. That's part of it. We should emphasise that's part of the Aniculum group. So there's and you operate, as I understand, quite independent. Not independent is the wrong word, but the individual agencies are quite independent within the group. Is that the right way of saying that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so I think there are about seven agencies within Amiculum, all established to do kind of different functions. So Mudskipper is kind of meetings, manuscripts, and other companies might focus on the digital components or the design components or genomic medicine or rare diseases. So yeah, we all kind of have a different speciality within the different agencies of Amiculum. So
and again, it's
overall,
sorry, go on. Sorry.
that's all right. Okay.
Well,
Overall, Amiculum is about 250 people across the world, and Mudskipper is about 40 to 50 people. So it's one of the larger agencies within Amiculum.
Okay, cool. And it's privately owned.
And it's privately owned.
Privately owned group. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Tim,
yeah.
just a couple of words on Oxford PharmaGenesis again.
Yeah, so it's an independent company, I would say medium size. We've got about 250 employees. We've got 2 offices around Oxford, one in Cardiff and one in London. And then we have a US office and a Melbourne office in Australia. All as one company, and yeah, independent. So everyone who owns it works here as well.
Okay, cool. And Simran, can I say Helios is the smallest of the 4?
Yeah, well, we're growing though. We're about 40 to 50 now.
All right.
And we have an office here in Audley Park, but also one in Witney that opened up in October. And there's about 5 or 6 people down there. And we have everything in-house, so writers, graphic designers, so everything's all underneath one company.
Excellent. But it's 2 UK offices, isn't it, at the moment?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, no, cool. Okay, so I think that's worth everybody understanding. I mean, we've got 4, I've got 4 of you in front of me, quite different backgrounds in many ways, and from 4 very different sorts of agencies, yeah? And I think one of the things that I always say to people at our meetings and all the rest of it is, don't just think medical writer is whatever level in one company is the same as another company. There are differences, and part of that is simply because the companies are so very, very different. So the careers events we run, it's very important. What I say to people is meet as many people as you can from different agencies and get an understanding of how those agencies are very, very different. So that's worth just emphasizing there, I think. We're starting to get some questions coming in. I'm gonna keep going with my train of thought just for a moment while we collect some more questions there. But just the 4 of you, actually, I'm going to just ask for clarification here. Are you all PhDs? Linda, are you a PhD?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And the other 3, sorry, I might have missed it when you said yourself. So let's just deal up front with a question which always comes up. Okay, do you need a PhD to be a medical writer in MedComms? Who wants to pick that one up and just make a comment? I don't care how controversial you are. I will add to it, but what's your position on this?
I'm happy to say something about this. There is, within our company, about 90% of the writers probably do have a PhD, but it's not a requirement. If you have other relevant experience, and that could be from a different agency or in a different role in a different company, but experience in medical writing in some way, that might be more valuable than a PhD. So it's not a set requirement, but it is something that does happen a lot at Oxford PharmaGenesis. Okay,
and a couple. Linda, you were going to say something. Can you just say what the position is at your end?
Yeah, I think we're more than 80% PhD, but you definitely don't need one to do it. I think it depends on what you bring to the role, and obviously a scientific background, but then some other experience within the scientific industry also does help. So no, you definitely don't need a PhD to work for Ashfield.
Okay, and Joe, Mudskipper and Amiculum?
Yeah, similar kind of story. I think most medical writers have a PhD. Again, not all of them, as long as you've got a scientific background or some other kind of transferable skills. I'd say that some of the account managers, there's probably fewer account managers that have PhDs than medical writers, but again, it can only help having a PhD.
Okay, Simran, what's the Helios position?
So most people have got a scientific background, whether they're a writer or a project manager, but again, there's no real requirement for a PhD.
Yeah, okay. So, and let me just put my 2 pennies worth in, because, I think it's an interesting question which comes up all the time. And I would concur with exactly what you're saying, but I did do a little study at the beginning of this year of what happened last year. I collected data from a number of MedComms agencies, how many people joined as an associate medical writer, what qualifications they had when they joined, and it showed quite clearly that a PhD postdoc was in the majority. postgraduate, definite majority, but there were opportunities for BScs and so on. But within medical writing and MedComms, there's definitely a tendency to take on PhD, or certainly postgraduates anyway. And it's important people understand that. Having said that, it varies enormously across different agencies. So there are agencies which, frankly, will say, if you haven't got the PhD, we believe a PhD is necessary for associate medical writer jobs. Others who are much, much more open. And it's much more about the person and their background and so on. So it's just, again, an important point to cover off. The other question I was going to ask was, and it's interesting with your 4 backgrounds, but just cover this off briefly. I get asked, okay, I've clocked the fact that I need a PhD, Peter, which, as I say, isn't entirely true, but let's take, but can I come in maybe several years down the line? I've got my PhD, several years postdoc experience or industry experience or whatever. Do I have to be a new graduate or a new PhD or whatever? Linda, obviously you've had, was it 20 years at AZ? So the opportunities are there to come in at a later stage in your career, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's about what you're bringing to the role, and how enthusiastic you are about it as well. So yeah, I think Tim said as well, it's about transferable skills, and Joe mentioned, if you've gone through a PhD or postgrad degree, you build up certain transferable skills. Again, if you've worked in industry of any sort, again, you build up more transferable skills. You may even have worked as a client or a supplier, so you've got that sort of lens that you can put on things when you start within MedComms. So any experiences you get where you're working with people and working with science can only help.
Okay. Again, the agencies vary, as I say, about it. Has anybody got anything to add to that? Or is that a fair way of pitching that, yeah? So but I think, again, it's an important point, because people who've gone further down their maybe academic career or something are just very much more worried about making the jump. The opportunities are definitely there. Having said that, the question which has come in over here from somebody, which sort of follows that, does somebody with, say, Linda, and sorry, it might be talk about yourself, but also talk about what the situation at Ashfield is. So if you've got lots of useful experience, do you still come in as an associate medical writer, or do you somehow come in at a principal medical writer type level? Can you just explain a little bit of what the position is from that?
The answer is simply no. You come in as an associate medical writer no matter what your experience would be, unless you've already been a writer somewhere else, obviously. But if you're coming in fresh to medical writing and MedComms, then you would start as an associate medical writer.
Yeah, and I think that's a very clear point from Ashfield, and I know that with your Legro program. Others, Tim, Joe, anybody going to jump in? Simran, any different point of view on that one?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So at Mudskipper, we don't really have job titles, so everyone that's a medical writer is just classified as a medical writer, no matter if you've been here 20 years or 1 year. So yeah. So
you'd come in as a medical writer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, and again, that's an important point, because job titles vary across the different agencies. But would it be fair to say you would be still coming into a training position? You're still viewed as a new medical writer.
Yeah, you're still viewed as a trainee, even though you're still called a medical writer. So yeah, you still have a kind of probationary period, and which is about 6 months in duration. And then I guess you just assess how you're developing each year, but you maintain your title of medical writer.
Yeah, no, I got you. Because I think again, this is just an important point. People think I've got lots of academic experience, I've written lots of papers, I'm a writer, therefore I should be, they should want me as a writer. Whereas what we're talking about in MedComms is all of you will have been through a training process to understand how to write in the way that the business needs you to write, because it's a different sort of skill. Yeah, everyone just agreeing with that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, let's just pick up a couple of the questions here. Is it a problem? We've got a question over here. Is it a problem not being a native English speaker? Anyone want to comment on that?
I'm not a native English speaker, so it's not a problem. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been living in the UK for about 9-10 years, between starting off in Cambridge and moving to Oxford. But I've been here for a while. It's not a problem. Well, providing you pass your writing test and you do have writing skills, whether it's experience as a medical writer or coming from a PhD straight away, or or maybe a master's degree or a postdoc, it doesn't really matter, or working in the pharmacy industry for a while. It's all about the experience you have, and most of the companies will do a writing test when you apply for a job. And at Oxford PharmaGenesis, we also have in-house editors. So even the native speakers with 20 years experience, their work will still go through our editors, and they'll still come back with quite a bit of markup. So there's no guarantee that if you are a native speaker that you'll have a better chance at getting in or writing a better manuscript or what you're working on.
I guess there's two sides to 2 points I would make. One is that the business is global. You're all working at a global level, aren't you?
Yep.
So actually, language skills or whatever are very useful. Yeah. But also, it is fair to say that the vast majority of the work that we're talking about in the sort of MedComms businesses we're talking about is in English language, and the requirement, therefore, to be very good with your English language, written English language, is an absolute. Yeah.
Yeah. But adding to that, whether you do a PhD or a postdoc, that's usually in English as well. No matter where in Europe you do it, it will be international research groups. So your English has to be of a certain level to start with.
Yeah.
So providing you have that, I think would be sufficient to move on into medical writing. And it's a good point you make that you work with international clients who are often not native speakers either. Yeah.
So, and again, just as a sort of follow-up to that, and I know we've got certainly a certain number of international attendees watching this. There is, I mean, MedComms tends to be talked about as a very UK English language-driven global business, but there is MedComms going on all over the world. There is, there's work at all levels, national levels all over the world. Again, it's just worth having the context here for this sort of conversation. Just you're talking about medical writing tests and things. It's again inevitable, and a couple of people have asked questions about medical writing tests. So just again, very briefly, can you give us a flavour? And I'll just run around the four of you again. I'm going to go backwards. So Sim, I'm going to go with you first, okay? You won't want to, or your agencies won't want you to tell us exactly what your writing tests are, but just give us a flavour of the sort of exercise you go through at that sort of stage. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would have to pass a writing test in order to get a job here at Helios, and it's things like looking at abstracts, or writing an abstract, or editing a document, seeing what's kind of stands out as being correct or incorrect, that sort of thing we have. So it's quite you do one before you come, and then you do one on site as well.
Okay, that will vary a little bit, but I'm going to skip up to Joe. Is that the sort of, in essence, is that what happens at Mudskipper as well?
Yeah, it's similar. I believe it probably differs between the different agencies within a Mudskipper, and I think the actual test that Mudskipper do has recently changed from the one that I did a year ago. But yeah, I was sent a poster as part of my writing test, which had the introduction and the conclusions omitted or covered up. So I had to kind of write the abstract for this poster. So I had to kind of interpret what the poster meant without the conclusions, and write a good abstract and submit that. And Mudskipper like to throw in a little bonus test as well, which in my case was a kind of test of creativity, which was to do a little haiku about Mudskipper, or about how I found the writing test. Yeah, and then this will be followed up with interviews at a later date.
Okay, Tim, PharmaGenesis. I mean, again, if there's nothing to add to that, just say the same. But if there's anything you can add to that,
it's mostly the same. I think abstract, especially because they don't want you to write a whole manuscript as a writing test, so there's some time constraints there. But also you have to think about things like a press release or other short materials that you would have to prepare. That's for a very different audience. So testing out different writing styles, really.
Okay, and Linda, same from you.
Yeah, similar. I would say that it's useful to look at a few manuscripts and have a look at how they're structured and how abstracts are structured and things like that for the writing test for Ashfield. But of course, we have assessment day where people will do a writing test as part of that, but then there'll be other things going on as well, like creative thinking and working as a team and things like that as well. So it's quite different.
Okay, cool. I'm going to just cover off a couple of the questions with a couple of comments here, and everybody can just nod at me or disagree with me if you disagree. But what I say to people, again, what I've seen from where I sit, is the agencies aren't tending to try and catch people out. The writing test is almost always there, but the agency isn't trying to catch you out. And the thing that I say to people is, bear in mind, they don't think you're a medical writer yet. So what they're looking for is an intelligent approach to doing what they've asked you to do. The information should be there in the brief. If it's not, there's no reason why you don't go back and ask. But the sorts of things to look out for are, what is the message, what they're getting at in here. Don't spend all the time reporting the methodology when what you're trying to do is put forward a message. If they ask for 900 words for nurses, don't write 2,500 words for the top specialists in the world, because you want to show that you're clever, because the point is to write for an audience. Is that all fair? It's difficult. There's some, I've lost the question, but there's a question basically, is it necessary to train specifically to pass medical writers tests? I mean, there isn't any way you can train specifically. But as I say, a common sense approach and doing what you're told is probably as good a bit of advice as you can get. And then if you take a week to produce 250 words abstract or something, then you're struggling with it, and it's worth thinking about that. Yeah, is that all? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, what they're looking for is aptitude, initiative, and an intelligent approach to it. But then they want to train you as a medical writer, because at the moment you're not a medical writer. So I'm just getting nods. So I'm just going to assume that I've covered off at least several of the questions that have been coming in there. Is that okay, everybody?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. What I'm a little bit intrigued about, if we can spend a few minutes, because I think this is an important part of this, is and it's difficult to be very brief with this, so be a little bit careful here. But you know, just give us a flavour, each of you, of the sort of day-to-day work that you're currently going through. Is there something you're doing at the moment? You can just say, look, as an example, this is what I'm doing, and this is some of the features of my day, sort of thing. I'm sort of throwing this at you, but can you do that? Can we start in the middle with Tim? Are you able to just give us a flavour of what you do on a day-to-day basis that way?
Yeah, so a lot of it is first thing in the morning, you start replying to the clients, because you always send something back straight away. You don't want to leave them wondering whether you received their request or anything that they have to comment on. And then what I'm working on mostly is at the moment manuscripts and Congress presentations, and some other interesting sort of medical evidence generation, where we're working more on sort of an advisory consultancy role rather than producing MedComms material. So it's quite varied. Sometimes your client, based on the MedComms you provide, whether it's a scientific slide deck or a manuscript, they say, oh, actually, can we build on that and can we produce something else? And then go back to the drawing board and try to come up with new ways to present something, or how to use this information further. So I think that's mostly my current day-to-day activities. So part of it is the very traditional manuscripts and abstracts and posters, and then some less traditional opportunities. And yeah. Okay.
Linda, can I ask you to put a few comments? One of the things I'm trying to draw out of this is you're not just sitting there writing all the time, are you?
No, I mean, actually this afternoon I'm running a training course for our Allegro associate medical writers, so we get involved in internal training as well as external training. So that's what I'll be doing this afternoon. But this morning I was writing some standard response letters for a drug that's due to be launched sometime next year. So I've been working with the clients to try and work out what data we should be presenting. So quite a lot of meetings and chats with them about, you know, how we go about it and what we include, things like that. So there's the writing side of it, but also the client work as well, which is more enjoyable than just sitting looking at a screen all day, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Joe, I'm going to come to you. What about, like, you know, let's give people a brief flavour, because I think you do quite a lot of event work, don't you? Sort of, so there's travel presumably part of your work.
Yes, it is. Yes, and Mudskipper, about a third of the time is spent with meetings. So that can be attending congresses and creating presentations and slide decks for expert speakers to deliver at these congresses, or advisory boards where there's a group of doctors who will come and discuss the latest clinical trials about a particular drug. So we might be involved in setting up these meetings, liaising with the speakers and the expert doctors to attend these meetings. And then I've been involved with kind of attending these myself, to listen in, to generate the reports, like the meeting reports, or even a newsletter following a conference. So that's been quite enjoyable. So it's kind of designing a fancy newsletter with pictures and photographs, So it's a different kind of medical writing to manuscripts and abstracts as well. So it keeps it varied. Yeah.
Okay. And Sim, you must have travelled a bit. Is it as glamorous as it sounds from the outside?
Not really, to be honest with you. You end up spending so much time engrossed in trying to get either a report out or an advisory board delivered that you never get to see the place that you're located. Most of the time you get to see the four walls of a room, but actually you accept that. You don't go out there thinking, oh, I'm going to get a holiday out of this. You know that you're there for work, so it's absolutely fine. And at the moment my day is kind of so this morning I've had an internal kind of catch up about I work on quite a big account where there's lots of little projects, so it's make sure everyone's up to speed with that. And at the moment I'm helping with so it's more like an educational based webcast, so it's not a virtual meeting where you have lots of doctors, but it's open to everybody who's interested in this particular program, and I'm helping out with the web platform itself. So the web platform is an external company who's doing that, but we're getting all the material prepared, and then we're getting the slides prepared for the webcast. So that's been my day.
Excellent. Okay. Guys, we've covered quite a lot of ground there. There's still some questions there, and what I'd like to do though is start to wrap this up a little bit in terms of this sort of recorded part of the session, and then we can carry on talking afterwards. So if you're in the audience, don't worry, we're not running away. I'm just trying to sort of like wrap the recording up a little bit here. Can I ask you each just to just maybe if you've got a tip or a tip basically, what would your bit of advice for someone looking at this thinking, I'm quite interested in this, I'd quite like to go and work as a medical writer. Linda, I'm going to start with you and go in that circle again. Have you got a tip or a trick that you can just pass on just to sort of wrap this up?
Yeah, I would say talk to some medical writers. The best thing you can do is talk to people who are doing the job and find out what their experiences are. As we found out today, there's so many different backgrounds and so much different experiences that people have been through that you can find out what's good about it, what's bad about it, because no job's perfect, and maybe where your strengths and your transferable skills fit in, and whether or not it is for you.
Yeah, cool. And aside from the fact you ought to all be checking out FirstMedCommsJob, I'll cover that one off straight away. But talking to people is really, really important. And what I'm trying to do with all of this is encourage people to talk to each other to get the insight into the business. So I'd absolutely concur with that. Joe, I'm going to come to you next. Have you got any little bit of advice or tip that you can pass on?
Yeah, sure. So as well as speaking to people, I guess you want to try and find out what kind of agency and also role would be best for you. So is it medical writing, or is it some other role within MedComms? Do you want to work for a bigger company like Ashfield, or perhaps a smaller company? And I think you should. Speculative applications are also particularly useful. Not all companies would welcome speculative applications, but often a lot do. And then it kind of cuts out the middleman. It cuts out the recruiter. So I think the MedComms companies appreciate speculative applications.
Okay, cool. I think that, and then again, the important point, different agencies are very different. Do your research, talk to people, do your research, you'll find the agencies are very, very different. Part of this is finding out what the right environment for you is. Tim, I'm going to come to you next. Have you got something you can pass on, an extra tip?
Yes, it's mostly what Linda and Joe are saying, and what you say as well. It's talk to people, go to MedComms events where you can meet people from the field, or attend webinars like this. But also, look at which company does what. Companies do different things, and some companies do multiple things. But really look at not just what they do, but also try and get a feel of the atmosphere at a company if you can, by talking to people who work there, and what sort of environment it is outside of the products they produce or the services they provide, and how the company is set up, I think is important as well.
Excellent, cool. And Sim, sorry, you're going last. So have you got a tip that hasn't been covered so far? What, for instance, can you advise people if they're saying, I don't know, a year into their PhD, say, what sort of things could they be doing which might help improve their CV with a view to coming into medical? So does that make sense? Have you got any tips?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the lines of being a postdoc or being a PhD researcher is quite different to being in MedComms, because you almost own everything that's your PhD. It's very special to you. It's very niche. But when you get into medical communications, you have to realize that actually, you know, your name's not on a paper right at the top. It is as a support writer at the bottom, kind of in the acknowledgements. And I think it's thinking about that transition, about whether you'll be happy for that not to be your own anymore, but to be more for the client and more as a team. So it's kind of a different approach, and you've got to accept that. And if you're willing to accept that, then that makes the transition a bit easier.
Excellent. Okay, I think that all made a lot of sense, and I think we covered a lot of ground there. So I've got an eye on this. What I'd like to do is close the formal session, if I can, guys. As I say, to those of you listening to this, we are happy to carry on talking. That's not a problem. But can I just basically say a huge thank you to all of you, and state what I hope is the obvious point, that you're all very happy to hear from people if they want to reach out on LinkedIn, which is the obvious way to do it. You're very happy to respond and say hi, sort of thing, yeah? So on that note, can I just ask everyone to give a big wave, and we will stop the recording there. And we'll carry on talking, but let's all say bye for the moment to the viewers. Okay.